Hello, good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to our third EFACIS Roundtable Discussion. As most of you know, thanks to our big and vibrant EFACIS community, we at the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies are in the very happy situation of being able to initiate, run, and become involved in various exciting Irish studies projects, which are situated at the intersection of culture, research, and third-level education. Ongoing projects at present are, for example, Kaleidoscope 2, which publishes original work by Irish authors on the topic of Europe in Ireland. Another project is Literature as Translation. It's our fourth translation project focusing on original work by Anne Wright. And we hope to restart our Irish Itinerary podcast series soon, which features conversations of EFACIS scholars with Irish authors and artists. If you're interested in recording such an interview, just contact me and you are happy to join the band of interviewers for EFACIS interviews of the Irish Itinerary podcast. In addition to these already well-established projects at the intersection of research, third-level education, and culture, we are currently concentrating on making our interdisciplinary research activities in the field of Irish studies more visible. And the EFACIS Roundtable Discussion is expressly dedicated to this important aim of our federation. Today, I'm happy to say we are joined by the largest group of linguists I think that has ever shared a room at an EFACIS event, even though, alas, this is just a Zoom room, but I'm really happy that we've all assembled here. Now, our third EFACIS Roundtable Discussion presents the Irish English Network, as you all know, of course. And the Irish English Network has recently joined EFACIS, and I'm really happy that you have started basically by organizing this roundtable event for us. EFACIS really only provides the platform, and all the work was done by our guests. We at EFACIS, I can only repeat, are really happy that more and more colleagues working in linguistics are joining our federation, which traditionally has a bit of a literature bias, to put it mildly. My special thanks go to Anne Barron, who is, I think, one of the masterminds and the main organizational force behind today's roundtable discussion. We first met at a workshop organized by the Irish Embassy in Berlin almost exactly a year ago, and I'm delighted that our first contact has issued into what seems to become a very fruitful collaboration. Thank you, Anne, for being such an active EFACIS colleague. I'm really excited to learn more about research on Irish English tonight from our distinguished guests, Gerardine Meaney, Anne Barron, Katharina Amador-Moreno, our new EFACIS board member, I would like to say at that point, Corrigan, Raymond Hickey, Bettina Migge, and Elaine, Vaughan, who can't be here but will be here. After all, you'll see what that means in a second, or a bit later. It's my great pleasure to introduce Gerardine Meaney. Gerardine Meaney, of course, does not need an introduction, but I will say a few words after all. And who could put the many achievements of Gerardine in a nutshell better than the Royal Irish Academy, to which she was admitted in 2018. So I quote, "She's a professor of cultural theory in the University College Dublin School of English, Drama, Film and Creative Writing, and director of the UCD Centre for Cultural Analytics. Her work, focusing on Irish literature of the past 150 years, has concerned itself with the dynamics of cultural change, gender, nationality, and ethnicity, and is notable for its groundbreaking nature its use of digital tools, and its interdisciplinarity. And thank you so much for practicing this interdisciplinary work again today in our context. You all know, of course, that Gerardine is one of the major co-editors of the Field Day Anthology of Irish Writing, Women, Writing and Traditions. But I must mention that here again. Gerardine is also the author of Gender, Ireland and Cultural Change, published with Routledge in 2010, of Unlike Subjects, Women, Theory, Fiction, also published with Routledge in 1993, and of course of many more and numerous articles and book chapters on gender and culture from various different authors, and looking also at films and TV series. She's co-edited numerous volumes and also worked on digital projects, of which most of you certainly know, the centenary multimedia exploration of an iPad app of James Joyce's short story, The Dead. I have successfully used that in my teaching, as I'm sure many other scholars have. Thank you so much for joining us here for today's EFACIS Roundtable and the discussion with the Irish English Network. And I give you the virtual microphone now. Thank you, Gerardine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a generous introduction. I have to apologise in advance. My internet connection is not great. I did exclaim before we started that a man with a hedge cutter can do an awful lot of damage to 21st century technologies. It's quite surprising. I am absolutely delighted to be here to chair this evening. I suppose I should talk a little bit about the origins of my involvement with the Irish English Network. And they are twofold for tonight's purposes. One is an overcrowded tutor's room in UCD back in the dim and dark ages when Karen Corrigan and I were both parallel graduate students together. And that really is the origins of my understanding of the importance of keeping in touch with what's going on in historical and sociolinguistics for anybody who works on Irish literature. The distinctiveness of English as it is spoken in Ireland is a huge part of the distinctiveness of Irish literature itself. The relationship between literary and linguistic studies has been in the background in Irish studies, I think perhaps too much in the background, and yet there is a codependence there, and I suspect there always has been. This interdisciplinary expansion of EFACIS is an ideal context to reconsider the importance of the linguistics of Irish English, not just from an interdisciplinary perspective, not just what can we literary scholars get from it, but also in its own right as having a very distinctive contribution to bring to Irish studies. The field has a very distinguished history and is currently vibrant and contributing significantly to our understanding of language, culture, history, and people. This has been particularly important in the context of cultural, social, and linguistic change in Ireland, where, for example, some years ago, a Maynooth University survey determined there were more native speakers of Polish than the Irish language now living on the island of Ireland. So there is a linguistic diversity and issues around language acquisition, bilingualism and trilingualism, which are really exciting to consider. And they're really important that those of us who work in more traditional Irish literary studies pay attention to the kind of work that linguistics is doing in those spaces. The other context I wanted to reference is one in which Carolina Amador, who's going to speak later, and I found ourselves in a virtual workshop, which was run by Elsie Perez in the University of Huelva. And we seemed initially to be talking about very different things. And as we both spoke, we realized there were very strong correlations in our work. We were both concerned with migration. We were both concerned with what isn't said. Carolina introduced me to the concept of empathetic deixis, which, you know, when you think about from the point of view of when is home here and when is home there, and the relevance of that to any literature which is produced by migrants, or indeed in a country which is defined by migration. She sent me off scurrying through linguistic textbooks that, I'm sorry, Carolina, I didn't entirely always understand, but a real sense of the potentiality here for that dialogue and to continue that dialogue around migration and language change and how we articulate the concept of home. These are hugely important issues in Irish studies. And it's increasingly important in the era of cultural analytics and digital humanities, where I increasingly work, that we do pay attention to the kind of work that has been done in corpus and other aspects of linguistics, because language is not just the raw material in which artists and the craftspeople of literature work. It is also the body of the kind of textual corpora that we are now analysing. The increasing emphasis on comparative approaches to Irish studies and EFACIS is such an important driver for this, makes it all the more important that we pay attention to, and more than pay attention to, that there is a real dialogue between linguistic, literary and historical research, a trialogue, I suppose, or more. So the Irish English Network, who are going to present their work tonight, have a really important contribution to make to understanding the role of language in identity, which is a question which is so much at the heart of Irish studies. And I really look forward to hearing from them about the history of the study of Irish English, the state of the art in the study of Irish English, really interesting and diverse research. So, without much further ado, can I introduce our first speaker, who has been a major contributor to that field over many years. Raymond Hickey is a young professor at the University of Limerick and Emeritus Professor of English Linguistics at the University of Duisburg-Essen. He is originally from Dublin, but he's worked on varieties of English, he tells me, for over 30 years. He has books on Dublin English, evolution and change, on Irish English, history and present day forms, dictionary of varieties of English, work on sociolinguistics in Ireland, and most recently, listening to the past, audio records of accents in English, are hugely important in scoping out this field and major contributor to the development of it over many years. Raymond is going to talk to us about the evolution of the field of Irish English tonight. So I'll hand over to you, Ray.
Okay, thanks very much, Gerardine. I'll see if I can share my screen with you now. Hold on a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
It's moving? Okay, right you are. So good evening, everybody. I see there, apart from the people who are organizing this, of course, there are lots of people listening in, and many of who are friends and our colleagues, and I'll mention some of their work then during this brief overview. I should say it's a brief overview. There's a longer version on a website which I have, which people can look at and download if they want to. I'll give you the link at the end of the presentation, but for reasons of time, I've kept this to a brief overview. And I should also say that I'm only talking about published books because there are literally hundreds of articles in Irish English, all of which are important, many of which have been seminal in determining the direction of the field over the past few decades. And I don't have time to even mention these. So please bear in mind, there's a lot more than what I'm presenting here, a lot more. But on the Irish English Resource Centre, the website, the link is below on the first slide. You'll find at the end of the presentation as well too. You can browse there and see what other people are doing and what we as a group are researching into. Okay, if one goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, one finds a man called Patrick Weston Joyce, who was a famous person in Irish studies, looking into Irish names, produced a four-volume work on Irish names, but he also produced this book, English as you Speak It in Ireland. And that's the first book on Irish English, if you like, as a book publication rather than just, an article in a journal somewhere. So that really gets the ball rolling as a kickoff then at the beginning of the 20th century. 1910 is a publication. It was reprinted several times. And not very much happened then for a while. Of course, there was a lot happening in Europe with various wars and that, so there wasn't too much research going on matters of Irish English during the first decades of the 20th century. But then after the war, there was one particular work by a man called Patrick Leo Henry, an Anglo-Irish dialect of North Ross Common, which is also a key work in this field, which came out in 1957, and that really, again, reinvigorated Irish English studies after the war. The next person which you mentioned briefly is Alan Bliss, who was professor of English at the UCD, an Englishman, but came to Ireland and became interested in the English language in Ireland and researched it then, published a few books then, one large article-length study with the Royal Irish Academy, and then later on a book spoken in English in Ireland, which came out of Wolfgang Press then in 1979. Unfortunately, Bliss died far too early and couldn't continue his work in Irish English, but he was a certain inspiration to many of us who started our work then in the 80s and 90s, including myself. Right, there was also at that time people working in Ulster, in the north of Ireland, of course, working on particular varieties of English there, which are, of course, different from those in the south of the country. And Robert Gregg was one of them. He produced seminal work on the boundaries of Scotch-Irish, and so what we call Ulster Scots nowadays in the north of Ireland. And he moved to Canada later on and then contributed to works on Canadian English there, the links between Ulster and Canada. Also should be mentioned to be made of a man called George Brendan Adams, who was the chief dialectologist in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum for many years, also produced many studies of English in Ulster and published a book on this, or an anthology of his work came out then subsequently, and then a great source of information on forms of English in Ulster. There are also dictionaries available for English in Ulster, both English and Scots in Ulster. Here are two, which are worth mentioning, certainly, that by Caroline McAfee, Concise Ulster Dictionary, and the Hamely Tongue by James Fenton, which has gone through many editions. Very good work for information on the Ulster Scots linguistic heritage in the north of Ireland. Then, of course, the work of the Milroys is very important for social linguistics in general, because they were responsible for introducing the notion of social networks to linguistics, published a number of seminal works from their studies in Belfast, and had an influence far beyond the borders of this small country. More recently, there's been other work on the sound systems of English in Ulster, which are quite complex and an intricate history. One of them being by John Harris from UCL, and the other from Warren Maguire from the University of Edinburgh, who I believe is listening to us today too. Hello, Warren, who just produced a book on language and dialect content in Ireland, came out with EUP there last year. Okay, moving on as fast as I can to get through this in 10 minutes. In the 1970s and 80s, then work began slowly again in the south of Ireland, if you like. I don't want to, emphasize this dichotomy of north and south too much, but there was work done in Dublin in the south. There was a conference in 1986 on Irish English in Trinity, and gradually then people became interested in researching the English of the south of Ireland in particular. Another person responsible for getting the ball rolling, so to speak, in the 1980s and 90s was a German called Hildegard Tristram, who unfortunately died recently, a German scholar of Celtic languages and Irish, but also interested in Irish Englishes. And she had a number of conferences at the University of Potsdam during the 1990s, to which many people came, or many of us who are listening today came, and also was inspirational in her editorial work on the Englishes in the Celtic realms. So very important. A number of important landmark publications came from her conferences. Then there are introductory works to Irish English. Here's one by Katharina, our co-host today, an introduction to Irish English, came out of Continuum in 2010. And there have been various volumes in Irish English. And the early one, which we should mention, is an important volume for our studies then in recent years. It's been that by Bettina Migge and Maureen Chasson on New Perspectives in Irish English, came as a conference proceedings volume from conference 2010, again in UCD. So there have been introductory volumes covering the fields more broadly. And there have also been monographs on the subject. I'd like to mention Marko Filppula, our Finnish colleague from the University of Eastern Finland, who produced a large study of the grammar of Irish English in 1999, here on the left-hand side, and my humble self too, a book on Irish English in 2007 with Cambridge University Press. Then some other works, then Karen's study of Northern Irish English came out in 2009, was 10? No, 10. Sorry, Karen, I haven't got the years right. Anyway, the Dialects of Irish English, the Northern Irish English volume, and then the Southern Irish volume by Geoffrey Callan from TCD came out in 2013, a few years later. So these are two companion volumes. The publisher is different for internal reasons, but they're basically two companion volumes for the North and for the South. Then there are urban studies, of course, from various parts of Ireland. I mentioned the Belfast studies previously, the Milroys. I did a work in Dublin English myself, which Gerardine kindly mentioned. I have a website as well for this, Variation and Change in Dublin English, which I keep updating. And anybody who wants to browse there and take any material from it is more than welcome. The link is down below. There have also been other studies more recently by, if you like, the next generation of the younger scholars in the field. Here's one by Fergus O'Dwyer, who's now in Moreno College in Dublin, on linguistic variation and social practices. In Dublin, he looked at the sports club and how language is used then for the internal bonding within this sports club, what linguists call a third wave type of study. Then Arne Peters from the University of Potsdam did his PhD on English in Galway City and published that published in Germany, in fact in our university, Duisburg studies in research on language and culture a few years ago. So there's a younger generation who also been very active then in this area of social linguistics. Okay, social linguistics again is really the key area where we're working on now. The historical work has been done, so to speak, and there's more work on the language and society area with present day scholars. Here's a book on social linguistics in Ireland, done by myself, with lots of contributions from the major players in the field, so to speak. And the volume I did with Katharina last year, came out last year, Irish Identities, Social Linguistic Perspectives, again expanding the social linguistic approach to Irish English studies. Then immigrant letters is a source of data which has been discovered and mined by various colleagues, not just in Ireland, abroad as well too, in recent years. And Carolina published a monograph on that in 2019, Orality in Written Text with Routledge. You see it on the right-hand side, and myself a book on Keeping in Touch, Immigrant Letters Across the English-Speaking World, in an attempt to examine these texts, which are, of course, very private, personal texts, but document types of language which wouldn't be available in more open public usage one finds in other published texts. So immigrant letters are an important source of information on Irish English. Then there have been individual studies, thematic volumes. Shane Walsh, another younger colleagues whose specialty is language and media and language and film, produced his PhD in 2009, Tomato Peter Lang. Myself did a sound atlas of Irish English some years ago, the DVD going with it. You can listen to all sorts of speakers from across the country, over 1,500 of them. Then Irish Traveller Language, done by Maria Rieda, who's now a younger colleague in the University of Limerick, who worked on the language of Irish travellers. And a somewhat older volume than before that on Travellers in Their Language, edited by John Kirk, who I also believe is listening to us at present. Hello, good evening, John. And Donal Wheel, who's now retired Professor of Irish from Queen's University, Belfast. But that series you see on the right-hand side produced a number of very nice volumes over the years, which we've all used and been very useful in disseminating information about Irish English. Then one should also mention corpus investigations, of which there have been many, a lot of them relying on the very important Irish, the corpus, which you see on the left-hand side, the International Corpus of English, the Ireland corpus in this suite of corpora covering the Anglophone world. The Irish one was done by John Kirk and Geoffrey Callan, TCD, and came out in 2008. That has been a very important source for many investigations since. And on the right-hand side is a book by an Italian colleague of ours, Daniela Cesiri, who was in the Ca' Foscari University in Venice, who used, again, corpus material for her investigation in 19th century Irish English. Right, corpus linguistics, again, following this theme. Jonas Sullivan, colleague from Mary I in Limerick, Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, affiliated with the University of Limerick. Relationship there is a bit is not always clearly defined, but Jonas has been working on the language of advertising and looking at the way in which advertising is used and the way in which Irish English is used in advertising in Ireland. I produced a book on that last year. Brian Clancy, again, a younger colleague from the University, again from Mary Immaculate in Limerick, then looked at the language used in families, looked at intimate discourse, another corpus linguistic investigation. Now moving on to quickly to lexicographies or dictionaries of Irish English. This is perhaps the main dictionary done by our revered colleague Terry Dolan, unfortunately died around 2 years ago. But he had produced this dictionary for our Barron English, then we went to 3 editions, which we all have used and still use as a great cornucopia of lexical material in Irish English, which he maintained over several years and published, as I said, in repeated editions. Then the migration of the New Irish is a very important field or a strand of Irish English studies at the moment. And 2 volumes just mentioned briefly here, one by a colleague in Dublin, Vera Regan in French Studies in Dublin, and then Chloe Diskin and Jennifer Martin, younger colleagues. Chloe is now at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Language, Identity and Migration, and of course, last but not least, Karen's own recent volume, which came out last year, Linguistic Communities and Migratory Processes, looking at the social linguistic integration of New Irish, if you like, people who were not of Irish heritage, come to Ireland then, and who are in the process of integrating into the Irish English community, in this case based largely in Northern Ireland around Armagh, where Karen comes from. Then there's some work too as well, somewhat older work perhaps, on the transportation of Irish English. Of course, many Irish people emigrated during the past few centuries, and there's been work on the linguistic effect of this immigration on various other overseas locations then around the Anglophone world. And here's one by Michael Montgomery, a colleague of ours, unfortunately died recently, from Ulster to America, on the Scots-Irish heritage of American English, and a volume by myself on transported dialects, legacies of colonial English. Then perhaps last but not least, as an area of Irish English studies, pragmatics, really very important, and it's one of the major foci of Irish English studies at the moment, is looking at the pragmatics of Irish English. Of great relevance, by the way, to people in literature, then pragmatics is concerned about the manner in which the language is used, not just the structural features of the language, but the manner in which it is used, which is spoken, and of course in literature, the way it is represented in narrative texts and plays, or narrative sections of fictional prose. So that's very important then for present-day research, pragmatics of Irish English. Here's a volume by Anne Barron, our co-host this evening, and on the right-hand side, a later volume by Katharina and 2 other colleagues, Kevin McCafferty from Bergen and Elaine Vaughan, of course, who can't be here unfortunately this evening, a colleague from Limerick. And there's the Irish English Network, which Anne will tell us more about, has its own website now up and running, and you can register there and become a member of it, so to speak, and then get information as it comes along, and be informed about developments as they unfold. And I should also say, perhaps a small little plug, but it's for the rest of us, not just myself, the Oxford Handbook of Irish English will be coming out hopefully next year. And there are some 30 chapters there with all sorts of aspects of Irish English covered by colleagues, many of whom I've mentioned, most of whom I've mentioned already, and many of whom are listening this evening. And that's it. There's a fuller version of this presentation, a very quick run through Irish English studies. There's a fuller version available on the Irish English Resource Centre, so you can download for yourself and look at it if you want to. And that's it. Thank you very much indeed. So that was a very quick run through Irish English studies.
Thank you so much, Ray, for the whistle stop tour.
It was a gallop, it was
the whistle
indeed.
stop tour of the classics there. That's what, yes, I recommend that to anybody who is exactly the range of material that's out there. So we take all the questions at the end. I think that's we'll have time at the end, hopefully 20 minutes, half an hour actually, for discussion. So I'm going to move on quite quickly to introduce Anne Barron. That was actually a very nice lead in, thank you, Ray, who is our organizer tonight and Professor of English Linguistics at the Leuphana University of Lüneburg in Germany. Her specific research interest is in this area of pragmatics, and her interest in Irish English is language use in Irish English from the point of view of sociolinguistics, variational pragmatics, second language pragmatics, corpus pragmatics, and intercultural pragmatics, which I think is a fascinating area. She's recently co-edited 2 handbooks, the Routledge Handbook of Pragmatics and the Pragmatics of Discourse with de Gruyter. And her co-editor there was K.P. Schneider. She's associate editor of the Journal of Applied Pragmatics, co-editor of the Studies in Pragmatics series, an important book series in this field, and a member of the advisory board of many important journals in the broader area of pragmatics internationally. So Anne, I think, is a very good lead in now to Irish English and the Irish English Network and how it fits into the broader context of linguistics. So I hand over to you, Anne.
Thanks very much, Gerardine. I just, people can see that? Yeah, good. Okay, yeah. So first of all, just maybe to clarify, because my name has been mentioned a lot as a host here today, and I just want to say that Caroline Amador-Moreno has been doing a lot of work with the two of us have kind of co-organized it together. So thanks to Carolina as well, of course, there. Okay, I'm just going to talk about Irish English and the Irish English Network and Irish Studies. And I suppose my aim is briefly to explore the current and potential future stages of Irish English within Irish Studies, and then to introduce our new platform, the Irish English Network. So if we ask, well, what place does the study of Irish English have in Irish Studies? That's one question I want to go to first, and I want to just note Irish English, what we call as Irish English, some people may know it as Hiberno English. In linguistics, we currently use the term Irish English as that is the term used in the study of varieties. So we talk about Irish English, Ghanaian English, American English. So, but just in case you know it by Irish English. So what is the place of the study of Irish English within Irish Studies? And to answer this, maybe at the moment, Katharina has talked a little bit about this at the beginning, that there has been, I suppose, a focus on literature in EFACIS. So if we look at a survey done by EFACIS in the year 2017 and 2018, and the survey was among the EFACIS centres, associations, and EFACIS members. And we see here in the chart on the right that literature and history dominate. So literature, 23% of members are represented by that discipline. However, there is a note saying that Irish studies, in Irish studies, there is a growing interest in linguistics and translation. And if we look to the top left, we see linguistics has 6%, 4% translation. We must remember, though, that those linguists are not only linguists of Irish English, but also linguists of Irish, of the Irish language. So many linguists working on Irish English are not, I would say, members of EFACIS. They may not even know EFACIS. They may not feel part of Irish Studies in its current form. And that's what we would like to change from now on. And why is this? Maybe a lot of Irish studies programs to date exclude Irish English. So maybe not on purpose, but it's the tradition. So there's a focus on the Irish language, on literature, history, culture, politics, and the English language in Ireland is not usually a topic. EFACIS, as Katharina also has said, EFACIS has a focus on literature, and we see this in the graph, and history. And of course, then all the conferences and the journals have this focus either. And if we look at the Routledge International Handbook of Irish Studies, published 2021 by Fox et al., there is no perspective there given on Irish English. So it's not surprising then that maybe linguists don't see themselves as part of Irish English. And I think a reason for this, or a number of reasons for this, yeah, maybe first of all, the traditional status of Irish within Irish studies. So we have the Irish language as, I suppose, an identity marker also in Irish studies. So I suppose that has been the focus of any language work. Also, the traditional organization of universities, many follow a US model where we've got linguistics in a department separate from literature. And so there hasn't been really much dialogue, let's say, between the two branches. This is different, of course, in the European model where we have literature and linguistics usually in one department. And a third maybe reason is that, well, the study of linguistics hasn't always offered or maybe fostered the study of Irish English. So linguistics over the years has had many different interests. Linguistics has taken different perspectives, I suppose, on language. For instance, universal grammar was interested in looking at universalities. What has every language in common? They weren't really interested in what is a particular variety and what is specific about it, maybe. And then if we look at structuralism and this interest on standard English, which was, of course, British English. So British English is well described, but that, of course, then didn't offer momentum to the study of Irish English. So I think currently there is a stronger focus on varieties. When we, within World Englishes, for instance, there is much interest in describing every variety in its own right, and every variety has a particular status, and this is an important, I think it has important effects on Irish English also from the point of identity construction. And also currently we have a focus on synchronic language use. So we look at utterances and texts and we analyze them as linguists rather than sitting in our armchairs thinking what could be. And this is also something which has given momentum to Irish English. So there are possible reasons for the current situation, and I think there is a lot of potential for Irish English within Irish studies, as Gerardine and Katharina have also talked about. In very recent times, we have had a lot of support from EFACIS, and particularly I must mention from Katharina Rennhak as president of EFACIS. We have had an open door to discussions on the status of Irish English within Irish studies, and many thanks for that. And I think the fact that we are sitting here today in this EFACIS room is proof that things are changing, and it is a welcome change from all perspectives. What I want to introduce now is the network of, let's say, the formalized network of Irish English. So we've had, as you heard from Ray, there has been a lot of research in Irish English, and we are a very tightly coordinated group. In recent times, we have formalized this in some way with the Irish English Network. So this is, I suppose, a joint platform which enhances communication between Irish English researchers. It also gives a voice to Irish English within Irish studies and promotes interdisciplinary research. And I'm really happy that we've been recognized now as an EFACIS Centre, and we have representation on the EFACIS board. As we already mentioned, Katharina Amador-Moreno is our representative on the board, so the voice of Irish English in different meetings that EFACIS has. So what does the network offer you? Maybe I'm just going to summarize this. First of all, it's free membership for anyone who is working in Irish English. You can stay up to date with biannual newsletter, Twitter. We have Twitter, Facebook, or SS feeds, etc. You can get connected internationally. So we have a searchable membership list. So everyone in the network is listed in this membership list. It's easy to contact people. Your publications are included in a publication database, which is searchable by whatever different ways: author, year, publication type, keyword. We have resource bundling, we have information on the different corpora of Irish English Ray's resource centre, for instance, so different resources are bundled here also. It offers visibility for researchers and the research area via the platform and events like the one tonight, and of course then the representation via the Irish English. So as being a member of the Irish English network is also helping not only yourself but the field in general. And I think it's a very great development that we have been talking with EFACIS, and they are really happy to introduce a reduced membership fee for anyone who would like to join EFACIS. So generally, if you join as a linguist yourself, you pay twice the fee as you would if you join our network and then say you're a member of it and join EFACIS. So there are many benefits also then to be had there from different EFACIS programs, and they have support from Culture Ireland and the Department of Foreign Affairs. I have, for instance, Evelyn Conlon, an Irish author, coming into my seminar to talk about different matters, which is interesting from a linguistic perspective also. So I can maybe encourage you to join EFACIS and join our network. And then for scholars from other disciplines who, of course, are also here tonight, you're also more than welcome to engage with our network. We have our newsletter, Twitter, Facebook. We have links to resources in Irish English. And we would welcome interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research partnerships. And it's easy, I think, to get in touch with us because we have these the different members all listed, publications all listed, and if you are interested in literary representation, then you just put in keyword literary representation. So we hope that this is a further step, let's say, towards further research within Irish English and beyond the bounds of Irish English in a transdisciplinary manner. So thank you basically for that.
Thank you so much, Anne, and again, mapping out really exciting possibilities and new developments there in the network as a whole. It falls to me now to introduce some of the other representatives of that network who are here with us this evening. Katharina, apologies for not saying co-host earlier, because I did know that. Katharina Amador is Professor of English Linguistics at the University of Bergen. Her research interests centre on the English scopes, discourse analysis, corpus linguistics, sociolinguistics and pragmatics, as has been as part of these exciting new developments. And she's the author, among others, of Orality in Written Texts using Historical Corpora to investigate Irish English from the 1700 to 1900. She's also author of An Introduction to Irish English, which Ray mentioned earlier, and has co-edited volumes on Irish identities, sociolinguistics perspectives, voice and discourse in the Irish context, pragmatic markers in Irish English, and fictionalizing orality, which is a special issue of the Journal of Sociolinguistic Studies from 10 years ago, but I think something which still has something to say to Irish studies more generally. So Katharina, will I hand over and let you talk a little bit about your research interests?
Thank you very much, Gerardine, and hello, everybody. What I thought might be interesting, since we have we decided this was going to be a short introduction of our area, was given the context that we're in, was to kind of talk a little bit about how I became interested in Irish English. I don't have a PowerPoint, just to try and keep it a little bit more briefly. But I've been working on Irish English for over 20 years now, and my name has been mentioned in connection with pragmatics, with social linguistics topics such as identity. But it was Irish English, or it was Irish literature, I should say, that led me to the study of the English spoken in Ireland more broadly. So that kind of codependence that Gerardine was referring to at the start was something that was very much I was very much aware of. I started thinking about Irish English probably as an undergrad at the University of Ulster, where I took a number of courses in Irish English. And then for my MA thesis, I analyzed the language used by John McGahern. And then after that, for my PhD, I focused on a really interesting but not so well-known author, and the Donegal writer Patrick McGill, whose use of language is really fascinating at many different levels, but mostly because it captures language use in an area where the linguistic landscape was very rich. McGill also recreates the voices of the Irish emigrant, and this type of recording of the language of emigration is what led me to what I've been working on since 2008, together with my colleague Kevin McCafferty, also here at the University of Bergen, which is a compilation of a corpus of Irish immigrant letters, which has allowed us to tap into how Irish English was used in the past. So how certain structures, sounds, or general features that we associate with a variety of English spoken in Ireland have changed, why some of them have been retained, why they survived, and so on. And this is where Gerardine and I reconnected, I suppose, after many, many years, when we were colleagues at the university at UCD back, I can't even remember how long ago, but through the tools of corpus linguistics, we can analyze patterns of use, we can look at frequencies, and also zoom closer into the context where these features appear. And one of the really fascinating things that we're able to study by combining corpus linguistic tools and digital or visualization techniques, which is where, as I said, Gerardine and I met again. This is something that it's really rich and fruitful in terms of this combining this corpus linguistic elements and the visualization element. We can look at, for example, how social linguistic factors such as the relationship between the writer and the reader, or the educational background of the letter writer, can dictate the inclusion or the omission of dialectal features. And this is something that I'm working on at the moment, and this is how the two elements can be combined by looking at the letters in particular. So this type of material lends itself to comparison with literature written between the 1700s and the 1940s, which is the period that is covered by the letters. By looking at the language of the letters, we can find out how much about, or a lot really, about linguistic identity, about context, which would be something of interest to historians, for example, but also linguistic stereotypes. So the previous roundtable was about stage Irish, where the representation of Irish English or Hiberno English, as we call it, as well is a key element. I've looked in that context as how, for example, the use of sure as a pragmatic marker has contributed to the depiction and also the perception of the Irish in fictional and non-fictional domains. And together with other colleagues from the Irish English Network, I've also investigated the use of the after construction by looking, for example, at literary and non-literary uses of utterances like "I'm after forgetting my keys." And since I'm interested in how orality is recorded through writing, I've also worked on how contemporary language uses are being captured by authors such as Paul Howard. I've focused on the use of like and so and yeah, no that we find in the Ross O'Carroll Kelly series. So this is just a general overview of what I've been concentrating on. In the not so distant future, I will also be moving on to the area of ecolinguistics through collaboration with colleagues who work on eco-criticism and discourse analysis. And I know this is something that members of EFACIS are interested in as well. And as has been mentioned, I will also be representing the Irish English Network at the EFACIS board, which is a great honor for me. I've been a member of EFACIS through the Spanish Association for Irish Studies for a long time. So I look forward to facilitating the connections between the study of Irish English and other disciplines. So thank you very much. And that's all from me for the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carolina. I have a feeling my connection is not great now at this stage. So just checking if people can hear me. Because I would hate to miss introducing Karen Corrigan, who I realise this is a UCD reunion tonight. Karen also lectured with me at University College Dublin and at Universities of Edinburgh and York. She's currently Professor of Linguistics and English Language at Newcastle University, where she's Director of Research in Linguistics. Her monographs include Irish English, a volume on Northern Ireland, Linguistic Communities and Migratory Processes, which is the study of newcomers acquiring sociolinguistics variation in Northern Ireland. Migration is something of a theme for us, I suppose, tonight. That latter book evolved from UKRI funding for projects, which was exploring language, migration and identity in Northern Ireland from synchronic and diachronic perspectives. Karen has also co-edited 3 volumes in Palgrave Macmillan's Creating and Digitising Language Corpora series. The last of those included a fascinating chapter which she co-authored with Carolina and 2 other authors on migration databases as impact tools in the education and heritage sector. So without further ado, I will hand over to Karen to talk to you a little bit about her research interest. Okay, maybe I should start talking about Karen's research interest, because I have been interested in her interests for a very long time now at this stage.
And I'm still just fascinated by the fact that you say corpora.
Yeah, you've been doing that to me for 30 years, Karen.
Don't be telling anybody it's been that long. Anyway, like Carolina, I wanted to start maybe by telling you all a little bit about my background, how I got interested in Irish English studies, the kinds of projects that I've worked on, and where I would like to go next, I guess. So I basically got into the linguistics of Irish English because I've always been fascinated by accents and dialects. I wanted to know, for example, why Mrs. Parsons across the road, who was from Southern Ireland, said ye when she was referring to me and my sister, when absolutely everybody else I knew said yous to mean exactly the same thing. And as Gerardine was saying, I found my way to UCD, where I studied Irish, linguistics and Old and Middle English, under the direction of scholars like Alan Bliss and Terry Dolan, whose work featured in Ray's overview. I was interested in factors like mobility and gender and how they impacted on how someone spoke. I wanted to know as well, why was it that my grandfather used local words like, he threw out words like handling? Now I understood that word, but I never used it myself because it seemed so terribly old-fashioned and completely uncool for me as a teenager. It's probably no surprise, therefore, that my own PhD then started to examine variation and change in the speech of both men and women who were living in South Armagh between 1940 and 1970. And the reason why these periods are important, I guess you'll all be aware of the extent of considerable social and economic upheaval during that period, that kind of post-war period. And I suppose one of the key things that I found in that research was the fact that it presented new opportunities for women in particular to effect change, social change, and also linguistic change within those communities. Since then, since doing that PhD project, I've been involved in a large dialectological survey across the whole of Northern Ireland, which then captured linguistic change, but in the 21st century this time. I found, for example, that young boys in Northern Ireland were adopting accent features that were actually spreading across the rest of the UK as well. Girls were speaking in sentences that seemed to have nothing but the word like in them, sounding just as if they'd stepped off the set of Friends. As Gerardine was mentioning, my most recent project actually explores the extent to which new migrants to Northern Ireland, what I call newcomers and what she calls newcomers, encouraged really by changes to EU legislation, as well as things like the peace process, which has dramatically changed the landscape of Northern Ireland. How were they acquiring these innovative features that I'd found in 2010 amongst the young speakers, as well as acquiring traditional ones, like the example which Katharina just gave us of what we like to call that after perfect. Something like, you know, Katharina is after telling us about her research. And it's a construction that's used to express an event that's just happened in the very recent past. And it's actually a borrowing from the Irish language because such a perfect exists in that language too. And a highlight of that new research for me, I think, was the fact that a Polish or Lithuanian child's ability to acquire a Northern Irish dialect, or in fact lose their first language, really depends on a whole range of factors. They include things like the extent to which they're integrated in a local peer group, but also, and I suppose this was the big revelation for me in some ways, was the extent to which the rules of their first language inhibit or promote their acquisition of Irish English as a second language, and allow them to sort of truly mimic a Northern Irish native speaker, or as one of my young Polish informants said to me, to sound Irish-like during one of the interviews that I had with them. So that's kind of where I've been coming from of late. The next phase of that project is to move away from looking at the teenagers in Armagh and to concentrate instead on the set of interviews which I did at the same time, but which actually compare speakers in the capital, Belfast, with speakers in a very tiny little village of Donegal, to see the extent to which geographical space and capital versus village status have an impact on the nature of migration to those places, but also on the extent to which people acquire more or less readily these traditional or innovative Irish English features. That's all I want to say for the moment about myself, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what people think about this research and how it connects with other research that they might potentially want to do.
Thank you so much, Karen. So we'll move on through our final speakers, and I think people have a lot of questions to ask at the end, and hopefully you'll have to contribute to the discussion. There's a bit of a theme emerging now because I am introducing my colleague Bettina Migge, and we really weren't aware of this many associations with UCD before we started. Bettina is currently Professor of Linguistics at UCD. She received her PhD from the Ohio State University, studied at University of Hamburg, the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, and for University of Berlin. Her publications treat topics such as sociolinguistics, language context, the lived experiences of migration, post-colonial pragmatics on Suriname, French Guiana and Ireland. She's currently part of the Cost Action Litme, where she explores language ideologies in the era of machine-generated language use. She leads the UCD research area on the sociolinguistics of Irish English, and appropriately for our discussions tonight with Gisela Hoffler, she edited an interdisciplinary volume, Ireland in the European Eye, for the Royal Irish Academy in 2019. Bettina.
Thanks very much, Gerardine. So my name is Bettina Migge, and I work in the School of Languages, Cultures and Linguistics at University College Dublin. And well, what is my personal association with Irish English? I think what is probably more appropriate to say is that I've been very much interested in variation and change, or language variation, for a long time, even when I was still a child in Germany, because there was always a lot of variation around. And well, especially variation in English was a very big theme when I was at university, already in Hamburg, but definitely in Berlin. And there was a lot of interconnections between variation and change research in linguistics on the one hand, and so-called new literatures in English. And so that, in sense, spurred my particular interest in varieties of English, and particularly in looking at why is there this variation, so this whole broad area of sociolinguistics, and particularly here, why are people using different languages, and what are the kinds of linguistic practices that arise in those kinds of contexts. Now, unlike a lot of other people here, I'm particularly interested in multilingual contexts, and specifically in how different languages influence each other in what is broadly termed language contact situations, and specifically also how that then impacts language use in institutional contexts, for example, schools, but also in the broader area. Now, when you look at my profile, you'll see that actually my main research is on Creole languages in the Caribbean and South America. But as I've tried to explain to many people over and over again, a lot of that research is very similar to what research in sociolinguistics happens on varieties of English, and specifically on Irish English. So since I've come to UCD, I've been teaching a very popular module called World Englishes or Global Englishes, depending on whether you're a graduate or an undergraduate student. And one of the things I do there is I'm trying to highlight to people, why do people use English differently? What are the particular reasons behind it? And I specifically focus on what we could call the political dimension, but also on the identity dimension. I'm always very surprised to see how surprised the students are about all of this, because a lot of students still learn that if people don't speak English like me, i.e. themselves, then there must be something wrong with their English. So this is an important focus that I pursue, and Irish English obviously focuses in these classes, and I'm always also surprised how little a lot of students before they come to UCD have really reflected on all of that variation in Ireland. In terms of Irish English research specifically, I think Gerardine and others have mentioned that I was one of the co-founders of this conference, New Perspectives of Irish English. And one of the reasons why we kind of co-founded it is because we felt that there was too little research on Irish English in Ireland, and also too little sociolinguistic research. Apart from that, I think my main contribution to research on Irish English has been the fact, or continues to be the fact, that I'm supervising PhD students, MA theses, and postdoctoral theses in Irish English. So, for example, John Lonergan's thesis on varieties of English in Dublin, Fergus O'Dwyer's thesis on language practices within the GAA club and how that feeds into the construction of male identities. But then there's also research by Stephen Luczek on language in schools, for example, or Marion Schulte's research on language use specifically in South Dublin, but more broadly as well. That book will come out soon. I also supervise, obviously, work on other varieties such as Malaysia, Kuwait, most recently, for example. Now, in terms of my own research, I have focused a lot on migration. So I was involved between 2006 and roughly 2012 in two research projects. The first one was came about as part of a tender from the Immigrant Council Ireland, and we looked basically at different kinds of what they then called national communities in Ireland, such as Nigerians, Chinese people, Lithuanians, and Indians, and we tried to see how were they finding their way in Ireland and how did they view life in Ireland. So that gave rise to a lot of interesting reflections. And then together with one of my collaborators, Mary Gilmartin from the University of Maynooth, we applied for another research project, a longitudinal study on the experiences of 60 people who had come to Ireland between 2004 and 2007. And here particularly, we didn't look at particular national backgrounds, but basically focused on those particular dates. And as you might remember, a particular time frame there was it was the height of the so-called Irish Taiga, but then also the height of the recession. And what we basically looked at is how did people construct social identities in Ireland when they came to Ireland, how do they view Ireland and its linguistic makeup, for example, and how did that change over the period of about 2.5 years of that research project. Now, we employed both social science as well as linguistic methods for this research, but in fact, this research project also gave rise to a huge database, and we've been exploiting it for social science publications, but also for linguistics publications. And in fact, we're continuing to do that. And as Gerardine mentioned, most recently, I edited that volume on Ireland in the European Eye. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Bettina. Really good to get that global perspective on Irish English. And a good place to switch back now to Ray and to Anne.
Sorry, what do you want to say something about my research or what?
Well, I was just wondering if you had, if you had a response there to the kind of take that Bettina and Karen and Carolina
yes.
interest.
Okay.
And what evoked your own interest in Irish English?
Whoa, yes, that's a long story. But basically it's when I came to Germany and I began to study linguistics way back in the early 80s. I became interested then sort of by nature, the fact that there's so much linguistic variety in Ireland, in possibly doing work in Irish English, and my PhD supervisor and various other people I came in contact with in Germany were very much in favor of that. So typical student of an exile, I suppose, when I moved to Germany, I became more interested in my home country than I was when I was living there. And then one thing led to the next, of course, for variety studies, as you will see from the affiliations of many of us, Germany is a very important place. And there are lots of people working, not just in Irish English, but in varieties in general. And there are many centres around Germany which are important for the study of varieties of English, of which Ireland is one subgroup, so to speak. So it was basically what happened to me is that when I came to Germany, I became more interested in Ireland, looking back in the country from abroad, so to speak, and then thought that, well, studying or looking at Irish English from a linguistic point of view would be a nice way to, to maintain these contacts with the home country, so to speak. I started doing literature, but I got interested in linguistics, and I don't really regret it, but of course I want to have the contact with the linguistic crowd, obviously, the literature people. And that's why we've been trying to do that over the years. But basically my interest was in language to begin with. Yeah. And at the moment, the field of Irish English studies there are very sort of different directions within it. I mean, we have a lot of close contact together. We go to conferences and workshops together and know each other very well. So we work together, but there are certain strands, if you like, within Irish English studies. And some of them we mentioned here, of course, pragmatics, which Anne does very much, and Carolina does pragmatics as well too, and the language of literature. Bettina's work in multilingualism, and then of course the New Irish, and Karen's work as well. My work tends to be on the pronunciation of Irish English, on phonetics, and particularly how pronunciation has been changing in Ireland, particularly in the south of Ireland. Karen mentioned that briefly, that the young Irish people are picking, young generation nowadays are picking up features from abroad, from other parts of the Anglophone world, particularly North America, and using things like, quotes of like, of course, in every second sentence, or every sentence for some of them. And equally, there are pronunciation features which people have been adopting from North America, which have been coming in. And I'm interested in how that happens and the whole procedure of language change. What are the steps involved in language change? What trajectories does language change take place with the younger generation? So it's pronunciation really which has been my concentration over the past few years.
Yes, something maybe to take up in the discussion, the Ireland ICE network Many of the Icelanders are really interested in Ireland, but also extremely worried about what happened to the Irish language in relation to Icelandic, but also to the creep, if you like, via online media of words and phrases and pronunciations into Icelandic. And do you want to talk away yourself there?
Ready to start the video if you still want to feature that by Elaine, or should we continue with the discussion here? I just wanted to say I'm ready to go whenever you want me to.
Will we have the video, and then Anne will give you the last word before we hand over to the audience?
Okay, yeah, sounds great. And Elaine apologizes for not being here, but here she is in another way.
Hi, my name is Elaine Vaughan and I work in the School of Modern Languages and Applied Linguistics at the University of Limerick. I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to present myself via recording, and I'm really sorry that I can't be with you this evening. For those of you this means something to, I feel a little bit like Yul Brenner at the moment. But anyway, I just want to give you an idea of my interest in Irish English, the sort of research and teaching and publishing I'm involved in, and the sort of collaborative work that I've been doing with regard to Irish English. So before my academic career, I was an English language teacher for a really long time in different countries like Poland and Mexico. And I found myself talking to my colleagues such a lot about how we use language, how it was different. And, you know, the nuances of that were really fascinating to me. So that's where my interest comes from originally, I think. My specific areas of research and teaching are in varieties of English more generally, but particularly Irish English. I'm also involved in corpus linguistics and corpus-based research, which you've probably heard something about this evening. So very, very broadly speaking, a language data-based paradigm that really works well in blends with other disciplines and other perspectives. So I work a lot with my colleagues in journalism, in sociology and in literature. So I'm also heavily involved in research into how people adapt and why they adapt the way that they communicate across the different contexts in which they communicate, how that manifests itself in language, so the areas of pragmatics and politeness. I've been researching and publishing on these things for some time, and I'm really interested in things like how people talk to one another in workplace meetings. Also, I'm interested in humour and laughter and how people deploy it. Deploy both as strategic resources, and like many of my colleagues, as you will have already heard, I'm really interested in small words like now and well and do you know what I mean, and how they operate, particularly in Irish English. So where my recent research and recent collaborations have been concerned, I've mentioned humour already, but I'm really interested in humorous texts. So my colleague and I have been looking at a short series of cartoons called Martin's Life, which you might have heard of. But we're really interested in the cartoons and how they use language and other semiotic resources to sort of stylize the idea of the returned immigrant to Ireland, the Irish mammy, and particularly how audiences respond to that and the sorts of things that they present as particularly effective about the performance, if you like. So I suppose they're reflecting those parts that resonate most strongly with their own espoused identities, diasporic identities, and you get a window into the world of that experience in that way. I'm also interested in language as performance. So other collaborative work has been in the sociolinguistics of performance. I'm from Limerick City, and myself and my colleague looked at the comedy duo, the Rubber Bandits. We're interested in how they use their performances, and of course language is part of that performance, to challenge stereotypes of class in Limerick, to challenge even stereotypes of Limerick itself. So how they leverage the performance, and they leverage words and phrases to kind of really stimulate pride in the local, I think, in the end, but also the sort of the nature of the performance itself is what the first part of the research is about. In any case, I'm going to stop there. Being part of this network has meant that I, informally over the years, and maybe a bit more formally now, has meant that I've had an opportunity to collaborate with some really brilliant researchers and been exposed to some really brilliant research, as you'll have seen with my colleagues in their introductions here this evening. And I can see huge potential for collaboration here, which I would really really, really welcome. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and I'm looking forward to rewatching the roundtable when it's available. Maybe not this bit. Thanks very much.
And we can just move to Anne and ask her to contribute, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll keep it brief. I know we want to start discussing things. Basically, my interest in Irish English first started similar to Ray's, to what happened, Ray, when I moved from Ireland to Germany. Well, actually, before I even moved, it was when I was 15 years old. I was an Irish school goer on a 3-week exchange in Germany, and I tried to accept an offer of a cup of tea, and I failed. I sat there for 2 hours without any tea and wondered what had happened. It was all about, of course, different conventions of how offer acceptances are negotiated in Ireland and in Germany. And I suppose it sparked my interest in how languages work, and basically in pragmatics, how people use language, how we request, express gratitude, offer, accept offers, etc. And that has accompanied me in different ways throughout all these years. So I was first interested in it from a contrastive perspective, German and Irish English, and how does it work, and how does it work for learners so for Irish learners of German who go abroad, what kind of obstacles do they meet, and what resistances may they have? How important is this whole politeness and this identity for them? And then that gradually developed into looking at the variety itself of Irish English in contrast to other varieties. So what is specific about Irish English? Is there anything specific about Irish English? Or what are these specific features? Are specific functions? And what about variety preferential uses? Are there aspects and features that are shared among varieties, but maybe one variety uses these features more so than another? In pragmatics, in the feature of language use, often we have features which are shared, but used maybe to a different amount, different strategies. So that is an important area. And I think looking to the future, maybe the whole Brexit thing is exciting, I think, for the acquisition of Irish English, not only among the newcomers, but also among probably the influx of language learners, which Ireland will potentially have. That's maybe another area, and one that I would also be interested in. So that's it from me. Thanks for that, Gerardine.
Thanks so much, Anne. Now, at this stage, and this is not going to be easy, we shouldn't be having a night with technology, but I really would like to see if we have any questions from the audience. So people can either put their hands up using the raise hand button, or they can use the chat function. Yes, Karen is also pointing out the newcomers who are fleeing back to the EU. Thank you. I see a hand up there from, it just says EFACIS. So
that's me.
That's you.
Hi.
One woman with a whole organization.
Yeah, thank you all again for those wonderful introductions to your work. I have many questions, but what I'm most interested in at the moment is about how you communicate across disciplinary boundaries, not just with literature people, but also within those different linguistic fields. I mean, you said it was a difficulty, or one of the reasons maybe for establishing Irish English as a field within Irish studies is that there's also the Irish linguists. Is there any contact? Do you collaborate in projects or on individual papers? And maybe a related question, which I was wondering when you introduced those, the history of English-Irish studies, Irish-English studies earlier on, Raymond, was whether those scholars on Ulster Irish communicate with scholars on Irish in the Republic, or whether those are really different fields, individual books. So what's basically the context, the communication within linguistics across the different internal boundaries? That will be my question summarized.
Right, I think it was addressed at me. Sorry, Karen, has your hand up. Will I take that? Anyway, and just briefly, the communication between people working within Irish studies is very good. We have conferences, we have workshops, we communicate with each other all the time. So that works very well, and we're in volumes together. So I don't think there's any difficulty there. And the communication between people working in Northern Irish English, people more working in the South is also very good. For example, Warren McGuire is listening at the moment, a colleague of mine, and we have lots of contact, and emails connect, email contact, we go to conferences together, that sort of thing. So the connections and the lines of communication within Irish English studies are very good, I should say that. With Irish, there's people working on the Irish language, things aren't so rosy. There are individuals who are concerned with both aspects of language in Ireland, with the Irish language and Irish English studies. One I'd like to mention is also, I see listening to us today, is Liam McMahona, who was previously from UCD, now retired. But Liam is great in that respect. He sort of straddles the divide between Irish and Irish English studies and works in both areas. He works in bilingualism, historical bilingualism. But unfortunately, many people who work in Irish studies, who work in the Irish language, and there are departments of Irish throughout all of Ireland in every university, they basically don't talk to us, and it's very unfortunate. In the old days with Hildegard Tristram's conferences in Potsdam, there was a time when there was fairly good communication, but that sort of has declined now, unfortunately. I would very much myself, because I have worked in Irish as well, and the phonetics of Irish and the sound system of Irish, would very much welcome if there was more communication between people working on the Irish language and the Irish English language. There are many historical reasons for that, to be too much to go in detail here. But I would welcome it certainly if there was more communication across that particular boundary between study of the Irish language and study of the English language in Ireland. But it's a very complex cultural issue. You know, it's really a bit of a minefield. Okay.
Okay, so I'm
Karen,
going to invite both Bettina and Karen to jump into the minefield there. I see they both have their hands up. And I know both of them have worked with scholars in the Irish language as well.
Yeah, I just want to add to that yeah, the relations aren't always that good, mainly because I think the lines of research are slightly different. Nevertheless, I have, for example, organized a conference at UCD with scholars in Irish on the sociolinguistics of Irish, for example, and Celtic studies a few years ago, and there was quite a lot of positive feedback on that. So there are younger scholars working in Irish that are particularly interested also in joining forces, but one thing that seems to be very difficult is to get both sets of people into the same room, and I am still trying to figure out exactly what it is, but I think what we would nearly have to do is at one of our conferences invite a particular panel. Now, I've been doing this in my other research areas, for example, too. When I notice that certain people constantly seem to be staying outside, I just say, well, can you not do a panel? And so that we look at some of those things. The other issue that we often hit as well is the fact that in a lot of, if it's just Irish, a lot of the presentations are in Irish then, and that already puts a lot of people at a difficulty if you don't speak sufficient Irish. So there are different things, but I do agree that we should encourage more discussion. And actually at University College Dublin, we have within the College of Arts and Humanities several different research strands, and one is Ireland in the World, where Irish English is welcome to participate, and there is interest also in this idea of what does Irish do across the world, a little bit similar to what does Irish English maybe do in different contexts. So, I mean, we could actually work a little bit stronger with people from that perspective.
UCD is actually very good in that respect, Bettina.
Yeah,
better than perhaps other
yeah,
universities.
but a lot of it, but you know, Raymond, I think I might want to add that a lot of it is also personal contacts, and there's a lot of this kind of, you know, okay, why don't we bring these things together? And this is also how our conference started on the sociology of Irish English. So yeah, we need to exploit our personal contacts a lot more, and I think there is a lot of overlap, definitely in the area of sociolinguistics. Yeah.
Okay, will we move on? This is obviously a fraught issue and it's taking a fair bit of time.
Did Karen want to say
any other
something,
questions
Charlene?
there? Sorry.
No, it's
Yeah,
fine.
no, Karen is just saying
I
we'll
think,
move on.
yeah, I think we've kind of done this to death. We want to get around the houses a bit more.
Yeah. Any other questions there coming up? Anybody want to put there?
Well, I just wanted to add to what Raymond and Bettina have been saying, and for the record, for 10 years, I ran a project on the Gaeltacht and the Scots-Tacht, where the big initial focus was Northern Ireland, but we couldn't do Northern Ireland without involving the Republic of Ireland and Scotland. And so, as Bettina said, how do you get people into the same room? I did. I, over 10 years, got Celticists and Anglicists and Scoticists and anybody else who was interested into the same room in Belfast. And we produced 8 volumes of papers, in which there are papers in Irish and Scots and English, in Ireland, both parts of Ireland, including Scotland. Some are in Irish, some are even in Scots or Ulster Scots side by side in the same volume. So these volumes exist, they mark the record. Now, there was a motivation for this. It was the development of language policy. What was the devolved government in Northern Ireland going to do about language in Northern Ireland? There was activism on various sides, and they wanted to join forces with their partners in the south and Scotland. And we wanted to keep a record in this. There were developments in the south, for instance, the establishment of the Language Commissioner for Irish. We had him up to speak, and it was all very interesting, and how that could influence events in the north. So we had a particular agenda, language politics, but it transcended Irish, English, Scots, Ulster Scots. And as Raymond pointed out, a spin-off was a book on the trappers' language, which again cut across the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. So these volumes exist, and there's an opportunity there for someone to pick it up and carry on, because they were huge success. And another reason for this, I have to say, and a lot of effort went into it. These were well funded. I put a lot of effort into getting funded. I did get funded. I could dangle a bait at people to come to Belfast, but it was a way actually of getting people into the same room. They didn't have to put their hands in their pockets to come to Belfast or have a few nights in a hotel in Belfast. So that was a great series of events in the first decade of the 21st century. For the record, I just put that.
Hopefully the current initiative to encourage North-South research collaboration and the funding that has been put, I think there's 40 million has just been announced by the Irish government for that, and the current round is just opened. But I mean, there's huge opportunities there to build on that kind of work that you're talking about there. And I suppose that's something that we have to always consider as academics, that policy context can have a huge impact on what's possible. As you say, if you've got the funding and you've got the framework, it can be much easier to get people talking to each other within that context. Any other questions or topics that people wanted to bring in at this stage? I mean, I'm very struck as I've been listening to all the presentations, the way that certain key terms keep coming back. And I wondered if anybody wanted to get back in on the issue of migration and multilingualism, because that seemed to be something which has really strongly been emerging over the last 10 years, maybe longer in this context. And I think there's a piece of work that has been done in Irish English in relation to language acquisition and language change, which has given you a bit of a head start over those who are waiting in the literary wings for the literature to be written, because the language has been spoken in advance, if you see what I mean. They have worked on this field. Karen, did you want to talk a little bit about your work with migrant groups in Northern Ireland? Because I think of engaging and the level of community interest that there is in this topic of Irish English as well, actually, that's really interesting.
I suppose one of the things, I guess it goes back to one of the points that Bettina made, was that while I am obviously interested in Irish English, I've devoted my entire career to it, I'm also interested in bigger issues of language contact and multilingualism. And one of the things I found very problematic in some of the schools that I was working in was the extent to which the parents of those newcomer children were actually so keen for them to learn English that at home they had started to use English as an L2 as a family, which of course meant that for a lot of the kids, especially the younger ones, their Polish and the Lithuanian were attriting, and they were finding, for example, that exchanges with older family members back home were becoming increasingly problematic. So that whole area, I think, is something that, again, it is interdisciplinary in some respects as well, because it is about trying to demonstrate to teachers who, again, are, their main focus is to teach these children English, to teachers, but also to parents, that actually holding on to that first language is hugely important. Again, you mentioned the idea of Brexit. Well, before Brexit, Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK had free access to having all of their documentation, trade agreements and so on translated. They didn't have to invest in any of that translation. And we're in a situation in Northern Ireland now where we have all of these newcomers who speak Polish and Lithuanian and other languages in which the UK would wish to trade. But we're actually finding that people are dropping those languages, often in favor of English, in ways that I think can be quite unhelpful. So I suppose that was kind of one of the things that I had thought of as important. So even though I haven't talked about it today, quite a bit of my, I guess, public engagement work with those schools and with those parents, but also with museum and heritage organisations, is actually about trying to show not just the value of Irish English, but the value of language more broadly.
There's lovely parallels between that and the kind of work that Katharina was showcasing at Huelva on the Irish emigrants to Argentina, and those kind of generational differences, and that those, the Irish accents when they spoke English, which I think was just extraordinary and lovely to hear. But I wonder if there is, and Gerardine, you might want to come back in on this, would that happen now? Would migrants now be so networked and so immersed in a kind of globalized version of English that they wouldn't actually hold on for generations like that to their original language?
Yeah, one of the interesting aspects about those who emigrated to Argentina is how they felt very much a community, and it's kind of reflected in the literature that was produced around the period when the second generation of Irish immigrants arrived in Argentina. I mean, all of the writing by the Nelvin sisters is really rich in that respect. William Bolfin's literature is very interesting as well. It kind of reflects the type of speech or the type of orality that was around the Irish community, even though a lot of them don't feel themselves like they have a very strong identity element to their Irishness. A lot of them consider themselves Irish, but when you talk about community, because they kind of took advantage of the fact that they spoke English, and they mixed a lot with English, as in British English speakers, and also American English speakers. There's that kind of duality there, very much present in certainly the interviews that I conducted when I was in Argentina. As to how the new generations will kind of hang on to their language or not, that's an interesting one. And there is, I was going to actually ask Karen whether she came across any writers, because there are a very interesting wave now of new voices in Irish writing who are not native Irish, as in they are first, second generation Polish. We have Nigerian writers. So I mean, listening to her perspective on the interview, so I was just kind of thinking, did you come across any writers, or did any of your interviewees mention whether they felt represented in these new voices, this new Irish writing?
No, they're teenagers, Carolina.
Yeah,
we're not going to be talking. We're not going to be talking about.
We're not going to be talking about literature.
No.
Maybe.
But what I can tell you, which is really interesting, is that it's very individuated. So a couple of times there would be, all of my interviews took place in what we call dyad. So they were interviewed 2 people at a time in order to stop me from kind of dominating in a way, so that they could really talk to each other and forget about the fact that there was this older woman who they'd never met before, who just arrived in school that morning. And what I found was I interviewed them in pairs, friendship pairs. And in these friendship pairs even, you would find quite different reactions to the home language. So there's a brilliant conversation, for example, between 2 young boys, one of whom religiously goes to his Polish Saturday class every single weekend, and who actually sounds so Northern Irish. Mm. The other kid, best friend, mocks him for going to these classes. And he has really heavily accented Irish English. You can tell he's Polish instantly within a couple of sentences. And one of the things that we kind of teased out during the course of the interview was very much that the kid who no longer really values Polish somehow holds on to that Polishness, that kind of Polish identity, through using this heavily accented English. Whereas the other kid, he sees his Polishness as being the Polish language. And that's how he holds on to that Polish identity. So they've both got a Polish identity, they just both express it in slightly different ways.
I think that's really, and maybe I can just, I think another, if you kind of turn the coin around and you ask, what about the Irish diaspora? How do those heritage learners, so people, let's say, who are Irish, they go abroad, they have kids, they are in second language terminology heritage learners, and it's the same thing I think for them. Do they hang on to their Irishness that they inherit from their parents or their grandparents? So I think there's a lot of parallels there between the diaspora and what's happening among the newcomers now in Ireland. It's a really interesting area. Yeah,
it's probably a good area and a good summing up comment from you, and there on which to end. I can see from the chat that many people have to go at this point, and we have gone a little over because the conversation has just been so fascinating. Sorry, Ray, you wanted the last word, did you?
One last thing is that there's a common thread in all of this discussion, that is the question of language as a means of identity, and language attitudes have a lot to do with identity. And there's very often a tension. People have a dual identity, and there's a tension between the identity. It can be a dialect and standard language, it can be heritage language and language of the host country. This tension can actually be productive, it can actually be quite creative. So we're all moving away from this monolithic idea of a single language being used as the only means of expression of identity. So all these cases, I think, have in common that people have a dual linguistic identity, which actually can be something quite productive if people accept it as being the new normality. The new norm is to have a dual identity. And this can be expressed by having 2 languages or 2 forms of language.
True, but I suppose it isn't new really either.
Well, no, it's not. Historically, it was English and Irish. So
yeah. Anyway, I think we should wind up.
Yeah. Really fascinating, and all those autobiographies from English musicians who talk about their early exposure to Irish singing. I mean, there's all sorts of ways. There's being lingual, but there's also multicultural and holding on to identities in different ways. So anyhow, it just remains to me to thank all of our absolutely fascinating speakers, to thank Carolina and Anne for organising, to thank EFACIS for hosting, and look forward to many more events like this where we have this kind of dialogue between Irish studies, English, Irish, and where, you know, there's this exchange constantly of views on language and literature, and we'll have to pull the historians in whilst we're at it. So thank you all very much.